Okay, that's my pitch. Now I want to dive into the things that I'm really interested in, and that is underwater stuff, underwater UFOs. Because I know a lot about the ocean. My whole career has been dedicated to it. And so this is sort of the interesting things that most of you probably don't know about. I published the very first Sol white paper. I talked about the issue in a scholarly way, and if you care to read however 25, 30 pages of it, check it out online. But I want to go into some examples here that are probably more interesting. And so, first off, there's not a lot of literature on this topic. Here really are all that exists. These books here, you can look them up, and so some people have taken that step to go into. And by the way, for you guys, I'd be happy to share the PDF of this presentation with you if you want that. I'm so glad to do it. And so these are really interesting books here. I've read them all. And I won't say everyone is rock solid in terms of their research and standards, but they're there. There are a lot of eyewitness accounts, and it's a point on the line of what this whole topic is. But I think really the seminal work that exists is this recent book by Richard, who's a friend of mine, and he let me review it, by the way, before it was published. He's got 3 volumes coming out. The first one's published, and it's really comprehensive and thorough. And it's really worth a read. Again, not what he does, and I love his approach. He basically takes all this eyewitness testimony from various sources, and he cites the source. He actually assesses the validity, and so some that are suspect, he'll say suspect, and but then. And so there you go. He just gives you what he knows. It's out there. He doesn't like take a side, doesn't throw out propagate a speculation. He just puts it out there, what's known. And so it's really solid and fascinating. And so what I'm going to give to you today and the rest of this is some of the highlights from the book and some of what I've heard personally. And so going back this century, he started out with one really interesting report that was published in the Singapore Times about a freighter that encountered a giant light source underneath the ship that then moved forward in front of the ship. And this is a ship captain who has no reason to report it. This is before the age of UFOs, right? This is well before the 1940s and 50s. And why would he even report that to a shipping captain of such an observation? But it was in the deck log, and he made the report to the periodical. So that was something. And then when you look at what happens later, you can see there's a sort of a trend. Going back to right after World War II, several eyewitness sailors on this ship near Alaska saw a disk emerge from the water and then dart off at high acceleration. Multiple eyewitnesses in the deck log of the ship. So there's that. Then you had an interesting occurrence in the Persian Gulf, which now, and I want to share with you, an important part of my approach in this is to take in what I hear and observe and then assess it for credibility. We can't just be like blindly following reporting because we're believers, right? We have to be objective about the data. And so this is a report that Richard documented in his book, and it was from another source. It was from 2 sources, actually. One of the books I showed you earlier, as well as the Naval Institute published an account of it in 1949 by a Navy officer on his ship. And he observed these spiraling lines of light in the pattern you see here in this region of the Arabian Gulf. And he wasn't sure what the source of it. Crazily, I saw the exact same thing when I was transiting the Straits of Hormuz into the Arabian Gulf in 1995. And it was actually bizarre. In fact, I was in my stateroom. I had finished my watches on the deck, on the bridge, and then my captain called me up. Get to the bridge, Tim. Okay, I come up, and I see these 100 yards wide spiraling lights, just like you'd see depicted here. It was the wildest thing in the world. And there were several of them, these basically these circles of spirals. And they were just rotating like this. And it was probably one of the most magnificent natural displays I've ever seen. But the explanation was fairly simple. It was bioluminescence, plankton that light up just like fireflies, And what was happening in the Strait of Hormuz, you have incoming and outgoing currents. And what happens in between the two currents, you get these vortices that are generated, and the circular rotation of the vortices, on the surface, it'll excite the plankton in a way that matches the rotation. And you can actually tell when you look at the water, you could tell it was a bunch of plankton, but ultimately, and so Richard grabbed that as a potential USO, unidentified submerged object, and it was at the time, but I know this to have a natural source. So anyways, some things can be explained, most things can't. And this is an example here. I have a Diana Pasulka, whose book you read. What's your name? Sydney. Yeah. So her dad was in the Coast Guard, and he was a sonarman. That's him. And you can see it says sonarman on the side, an old black and white photo of him. And they observed an object underwater on the sonar that was very large and moved out of the area, and they knew it because they had the bottom, and then all of a sudden there was an object at shallow depth, very large, as they transited over nearly half a mile, and then it was gone. And they came back, and the object wasn't there. What is that? That's basically an unidentified submerged object. But it affected him. It was so unusual. He had thousands of hours on the sonar, and then there was that. And I know the sonars they're using, though, because I have a PhD in underwater acoustics, you can get returns from fish schools, plankton on the mixed layer, but not the high source target levels the acoustic backscatter level that they saw. So this is clearly something that was hard and large. Well, there was that. Then the USS Maury had an identical observation. Sonar hit at a shallow depth over a long distance, and then they went back and it wasn't there. And they know their systems. They know when it's biologics. Whales don't backscatter like that, or animals or plankton. So there was something there. And Richard reported that in his book. I thought that was interesting because when I owned the oceanographic ships in the Navy, I had the second USS Maury that was under me. And it was the same type of ship, a hydrographic ship. This was really interesting in Richard's book. This aircraft carrier, nuclear powered, or nuclear jets, pardon me, they observed a giant cigar-shaped craft in the region, and it was observing them, trailing them. And you have all these witnesses on the ship, sailors. Aircraft carriers are big. I was on one. There's 3,000 sailors. Then when you have the air wing, it's 5,000 people, and multiple witnesses. And then before it left, 2 discs popped out of the water. Everybody saw them, and then they all exited the area rapidly together. So there's a sighting, very credible, and many, many witnesses. And then there's this. Later, in off Nova Scotia, and if you guys are interested in this topic, this is the book. It's a book by an author named Chris Stiles. And he goes into kind of a CSI investigation to interview divers from the Canadian Navy that were involved with an effort after a mine warfare exercise called Sweep Clear 5 with Canadian ships that observed a UFO come into the water, too. And then when the ships went and investigated it and sent down divers, they observed 2 disc-shaped crafts and entities outside of them repairing them. Divers they didn't testify. They were interviewed and claimed this. They even said they took video. And so this is, again, this is just a witness account. I don't have data. I'm not saying it really happened, but kind of unlikely to be fabricated. Possibly, maybe, I don't know. It's a story that actually Richard didn't report on, but I've heard about. So interesting read. Then this is really interesting. Australian researcher named Jeff Cruikshank, he looked into this and gathered all this data. So in 1962, there was a nuclear airburst test trying to assess the impact of ICBM or nuclear detonation on our ICBMs. And so they launched this ICBM up into the atmosphere at 42 kilometers, detonated a nuclear warhead, and then on the lower right, you see 2 aircraft that were aloft observing it with their cameras. This is the image on the upper right of of one of those cameras watching the airburst. The big circular thing is the airburst. And that triangle little thing there, that is a censored part of the airburst. And the original video shows basically an object fall from the sky. And I have, with 100% certainty from a senior government official former government official, advisor to several presidents named Harold Malmgren, you can look him up, he knows about this test. That was a UFO that crashed out of the sky because the EMP from the burst interfered with its, somehow caused it to crash. And we have no idea. Well, actually we may, I don't know though. And so what happened is this ship went and recovered it. The airburst was over some Pacific islands at a safeguard, and in the deck log, you can read about there, I highlighted it, that they recovered this pod. They called it a pod, and when they recovered the pod, if you look in the log over on the right, they lost power, which is one of these common things that happens in UAP interactions. Cars lose power, something's going on there electromagnetically. So that's very interesting, and I know with certainty from authoritative sources like Harold, this was a UAP, we recovered it, I don't know where it is, but again, this is not uncommon. Then you have people who are starting to come to me. I had an officer of the Navy who came to me, served on this ship, he was in the North Atlantic, and in 1984, during a very severe storm in the North Atlantic, they detected an object on sonar that started closing rapidly on them. They found it unusual because the sea state was really high, and when the sea state's high, there's a lot of ambient noise, and normally you can't detect anything, and anything can't detect you. Again, this is my PhD area of study. So they were really surprised by this, and then when it started rapidly closing on them, they were actually frightened because this had every signature of a Russian torpedo, which they trained on. This is the Cold War, nuclear submarine officers, this is a ballistic missile sub, this is something they were ready for. And that had every aspect of a Russian torpedo closing on them. So what did they do? They dove to crush depth, near crush depth. So there's a depth that you can't go deeper, and they know what it is. Trust me, they try not to go near it. And this was an older boat, by the way, the von Steuben. But they were terrified. They were absolutely thinking this was their last day on Earth. And so they got really close to crush depth, and they basically said, okay, we're going to hold. And the object came near them, stopped, and then went aft on their stern and followed them for a few minutes, and then rapidly departed the area. As far as I know, the Soviets, had no technology that could do that then. Today, maybe. That's actually classified, but that was pretty much another unidentified submerged object. And because I've been speaking out, this officer, very objective guy, engineer, he called me up. He said, hey, I saw something I cannot explain. And it was that long ago. He did this to me. He did this a year ago. So think how many years since that occurred, and he's thought about it every day of his life. So it's something. Then after my last hearing, I had another guy call me up. He was a Navy captain, flew in P-3s. That's the aircraft you see on the upper right. This is an aircraft that does anti-submarine warfare. It basically drops down these things called sonar buoys that listen for submarines, and when they get a hit, they transmit it via radio signal to the aircraft. And so he did that for a career. He's an expert in this topic and field. And then he went afterwards, and he retired and worked as a civilian on that ship you see there, which is an acoustic surveillance ship. This kind of ship is how we find subs, both in Russian and Chinese. And the way they operate is they use two means. They use low-frequency active sonar, active. So they send out a big ping at low frequency that's very loud and has a wide range, and they wait for a return echo. And if anything is big and metal and hard down there in the ocean, they're going to hear it. They're going to know it's there. It's the whole purpose and design of these things. And we care about this a lot. So ultimately, they, at two different occasions off Japan, got really strong hits just at the same level as any enemy submarine would be. And so, of course, then the mode is to go and say, all right, now we're going to identify the sub. and then turn on the passive sonar. And the passive sonar will listen for things like the propeller's rotation or certain engineering components in the plant or even the flow noise around the hull of the submarine. All of those emit a very specific frequency signature, and we have classified tables of every adversary submarine and their specific signatures. They're like fingerprints. And so that's how we go and find adversaries and stay up on them. And for both these occasions, 0 passive hits, nothing. No, and this is a giant anomaly. I mean, this is like having a high-resolution satellite looking at something, and in terms of but the underwater equivalent. And again, this officer found that so anomalous. After 35 years, he called me up after my hearing and said, "I got to tell you something." So these are real things. Then, if you've read Lou's book, he talks about a instance where full motion video, I believe it was a Reaper, where he observed a very large object the size of an oil derrick traveling fast underwater. Now, Lou's not a bullshitter, okay? I know him personally. He's come out and taken great risks. So the things he says are real. He's not embellishing. And actually, I know this video from someone else too. He was an NRO, National Reconnaissance Office employee, and he's still with the government actually. So I have verified this from another source. That's crazy. I haven't seen the video, but I want to. But that's there. And so, and then Lou also talked about the fact, in his book, that the Navy was doing a missile recovery. I actually think Lou was wrong. I think it was really a torpedo recovery, because we don't normally do that. This is a picture of a torpedo recovery, where we send a kind of a blank round off to test how good the torpedo works, and then at a certain time it'll pop up from depth and they recover the asset because they're expensive. And so ultimately, but something similar, where a rescue swimmer was sent down to hook up to the retrieved asset, and then they observed a giant black mass surfacing, coming near the surface, and it so freaked out the crew that they let go of the torpedo and they launched up. But this is something they came forward and talked about because they were so traumatized by it. It was just so unlike anything they'd ever seen. So there's another USO that I can't explain, but I want to learn more about. A few other topics, the Nimitz Tic Tac. I mentioned that there was a roiling surface underneath the object. Who knows what that was? So when I go to the Hill today, was it a USO? Was that thing being launched by a mothership USO? I don't know. But I'm going to the Hill this week, and what I'm going to recommend basically is now I'm in touch with the people who operate the Navy's undersea surveillance system of sonars, and I had a phone call with a guy who works there, and basically, so now I have a point of contact that Congress can go to and look at the dates of every one of these things like this and find the acoustic data and see if there's a corollary there. And so those are the recommendations I'm going to make to the House Oversight Committee, is to go look at that acoustic data and get some verification. For that, also for this was off Puerto Rico, Aguadilla, the location, and the Customs and Border Patrol found they have data of a rapidly moving UAP going 90 miles per hour, going in and out of the water. Raise your hands if you've ever seen the video. Yep. You guys are pros, I can tell. So, yeah. And so there's that example. I want to get the acoustic data around the Caribbean on that too, so I'm going to recommend that. And then there was this off SoCal in 2019, this object that no flight control surfaces or exhaust went into the water, and it was observed by the Omaha, and then its sister ship went and observed similar objects recently reported later in I think 2022. So, and I know the petty officer on the bridge of that ship who saw it. He came out to me. But this area is heavily instrumented with acoustic sensors. So again, I'm going to try to see if we can get some acoustic correlation here with this. I'm going to get Congress to go do that. A couple other things. So one of the books I showed you, Preston Dennett wrote a book about SoCal USOs and UAPs, and he speculated about this undersea base. And that's all out there. Hal Puthoff has talked about that possibility. He's a well-regarded physicist and engineer. And this particular area off Southern California, in Google Earth, it's rendered like this. So it's important to be objective. I'm an oceanographer. So I did. I went and looked at the data, and I'll get to that. But weirdly, again, going back to disinformation, as this whole thread of undersea alien base was going around last year in UFO Twitter or whatever it's called, this happened. Google removed it. They decimated it, meaning they kind of undersampled the data. They provided undersampled data so the feature wouldn't appear. Why did they do that? Just like Sean Kirkpatrick. Why would Sean Kirkpatrick say those things about me that were false? Who influenced Google to do this? Sadly, though, they did it, and they shouldn't have, because to me, there's no data that confirms it's a base. It's actually a real geological feature. Here's the real geology, and you can see it looks fairly natural. I mean, it's anomalous in terms of weird-looking thing, but it looks like a geological feature. There's been a paper on it. They've done seismic surveys of it, so meaning low-frequency sound that penetrates the seabed. That you can, if there was a base under there, they know it. They have the data. And it wasn't there. So it's important to look up and not speculate, but to look at the data. And for this thing, I think we can discredit that. But I'm not going to say, there's a possibility. They come from somewhere. They go somewhere. I don't know where. But so there could be something undersea, and I think that's certainly worth considering. But in this case, I don't think it is. Now, I just